April 1943, Camp Hereford, Texas. A pencil shook in the hand of Sergeant Joseph Morelli as he wrote a letter that would not reach his mother in Sicily until 8 months later. His words felt almost impossible to believe. "Mama, they treat us like guests, not prisoners. White bread every day, meat, vegetables, more food than we saw in 2 years of war. I cannot understand these Americans through the barracks window." Morelli saw electric lights glowing across the Texas plains. Tractors worked the fields at night. American guards laughed and shared cigarettes with Italian prisoners. Everything he witnessed contradicted Mussolini's promises. Italy was supposed to be building a new Roman Empire. America, the propaganda said, was weak and divided, ready to fall. Yet here, in captivity, Italian soldiers found a land of abundance beyond imagination. When the first Italians arrived at Camp Hereford in April 1943, they were part of nearly 51,000 Italian prisoners of war who would reach American soil. The earliest had arrived the previous November, after the Allied invasion of North Africa. In Tunisia, General Giovanni Messe's First Army had surrendered after months without supplies. Defeated soldiers expected cruelty, forced labor, maybe even death. Instead, their letters home would describe something very different, quasi-paradise. The collapse in Tunisia had been sudden. After years of desert warfare, Italian troops were outnumbered, outgunned, and abandoned by supply lines. Their German allies treated them as expendable. British and American forces pressed from two sides. By May 1943, 275,000 Axis troops surrendered, among them 50,000 Italians. These men became the first wave of prisoners sent to the United States. From the collection camps in Tunisia, their journey of defeat turned into one of revelation. American military efficiency struck them immediately. They received thorough medical checks, often their first real care in years. Their tattered uniforms were replaced with new clothing. But most shocking of all was the food: white bread, canned meat, coffee with sugar, and even chocolate. The Liberty ships that carried them across the Atlantic were supposed to return empty after delivering supplies to Europe. Instead, by the summer of 1943, they brought back up to 30,000 prisoners a month. The voyage itself became a lesson. Italian soldiers saw with their own eyes what fascist propaganda had denied. The ships were monuments of American industry, mass-produced at a speed Italy could never dream of. Even standard cargo vessels carried radar technology that Italians had seen only on the most advanced British warships. On the voyage across the Atlantic, the shocks continued. In the ship's mess hall, Italian prisoners saw American sailors with ice cream machines, unlimited coffee, fresh bread and meat served daily. Leftovers were casually thrown away, food that in Italy would have been treasured. This waste was not cruelty. It was proof of resources beyond comprehension. When they disembarked at ports like Norfolk, Virginia, or the West Coast, a new world unfolded before their eyes. The docks stretched for miles, filled with dozens of ships loading and unloading at the same time. Giant electric cranes lifted cargo that would have taken teams of men back home. Even more striking was the sight of ordinary civilians. Parking lots filled with cars owned not by the wealthy, but by factory workers. Shops displayed goods long vanished from Italian shelves. Every building had electric lights. The journey inland deepened the shock. They traveled by passenger train, not cattle cars, seated on cushions under bright lights, with dining cars serving meals. From the windows they saw a country overflowing with wealth. Small towns glowed with electricity. Farms ran on tractors and power lines. Factories thundered with 3 shifts of workers, day and night. America was not the weak nation Mussolini had described. It was a land of endless energy and abundance. Camp Hereford, Texas became one of the largest centers for Italian prisoners, holding over 2,500 men within its barbed wire fences. The camp itself exceeded Italian military standards. Barracks had electricity, hot showers, flush toilets, and heating. The infirmary contained modern equipment, X-ray machines, and surgical tools many had never seen before the war. For men who expected hunger and brutality, the camp felt almost like paradise. They received 3 full meals a day: meat, bread, vegetables, milk, and often dessert. Holiday dinners surpassed anything many had known even before the war. Some prisoners later recalled that the kitchens threw away more food in a single day than their families in Italy saw in a week. Although there were moments of harsh discipline, especially toward fascist loyalists, most prisoners lived in clean barracks, with warm showers and opportunities to earn small wages to spend at the camp store. Then came September 8, 1943. Italy surrendered to the Allies. By October, the new Italian government had declared war on Germany. Everything changed. In February 1944, the U.S. Army Service Corps offered Italian prisoners a choice: remain in captivity or join newly created Italian service units to assist the Allied war effort in non-combat roles. The response was overwhelming. Out of 51,000 Italian prisoners in America, more than 45,000 volunteered. They signed pledges to work alongside their former enemies against Germany. In return, they gained privileges and freedoms that transformed their experience. From labor, assignments across the country to opportunities that would reshape their lives. Though still classified as prisoners of war, the Italians of the service units now wore new uniforms. The only difference was a small patch stitched to the left sleeve and cap. One word: Italy. They received a stipend of $24 a month. 1/3 was paid in cash, the rest in camp currency that could be used at the post exchange for personal items. In California, where the war against Japan raged until 1945, the presence of Italian service unit members was welcomed warmly. The state's long-established Italian-American community, fishermen, farmers, and winemakers since the gold rush, embraced them as distant cousins. On Angel Island, Italian prisoners even rented a hall in San Francisco with their own money. Every Saturday night, they organized dances that became major social events. American women, carefully chaperoned, eagerly came to meet the Italian soldiers. In the fields of California, Italians witnessed agriculture on a scale beyond imagination. Farms stretched larger than entire provinces back home. Machines harvested crops with the power of hundreds of men. Across America, Italian service unit members became essential to the war effort. They loaded ships bound for D-Day, harvested food that would otherwise rot, and maintained military vehicles with skills gained in North Africa. Between 1943 and 1945, Italian service units contributed more than 90 million man-days of labor, saving the U.S. government an estimated $230 million. At the Brooklyn Army Terminal, they loaded supplies that would free Europe. In the farmlands, they saved harvests that fed both America and its allies. Many worked with pride, knowing that each crate, each shipment brought Italy closer to liberation from German occupation. By June 1943, more than 14,500 Italians were held in camps across the United States. After Italy's surrender, their role expanded until they became indispensable in factories, ports, and fields. Even under strict military rules, love found a way. Italian prisoners met American women at church services, social events, and through their work. In Ogden, Utah, local churches hosted weekend dances while Italian-American families welcomed prisoners for Sunday dinners. Officially, marriage between prisoners of war and American citizens was forbidden, yet sympathetic priests performed secret ceremonies, and many couples kept their love alive through letters. After the war, dozens of American women traveled to Italy to marry their former sweethearts before returning as wives of new immigrants. The Italian-American community played a crucial role in making prisoners feel less alone. Families offered food, friendship, and helped them write letters home. These bonds often lasted decades after the war. Christmas 1943 brought an unforgettable moment. American churches and civic groups sent packages filled with cigarettes, chocolate, and toiletries, luxuries even for Americans during wartime. Local communities organized dinners and celebrations. At Camp Hereford, choirs sang Italian carols, and Catholic churches held midnight mass in both Latin and Italian. For many prisoners, it was a holiday of unexpected warmth in a foreign land. The Christmas of 1943 brought a feast unlike anything Italians had seen since before the First World War. Tables overflowed with turkey, ham, side dishes, and desserts. For men who had expected hunger in captivity, the abundance was almost unbelievable. Acts of kindness like this shattered the last pieces of fascist propaganda. The Americans, once painted as weak and divided, showed generosity that only a confident and victorious nation could display. By 1944, thousands of Italian prisoners were enrolled in educational programs. They studied English, mathematics, history, and vocational skills. Universities offered correspondence courses. Camps showed Hollywood films and even published their own newspapers, simple bulletins that soon grew into sophisticated journals discussing democracy and post-war reconstruction. The Italians built theaters, formed orchestras, and created art that still survives today. They carved fountains, painted murals, and built chapels with craftsmanship that reflected Italy's long artistic tradition. These were not crude prison crafts, but works of professional quality, lasting reminders of beauty born in captivity. When news of the Allied invasion of Normandy arrived on June 6, 1944, the camps erupted in celebration. These were once enemies landing in France, but also the liberators who would free Italy from German rule. Italian prisoners volunteered for extra shifts, loading supplies and painting messages on boxes. For Rome, death to the Nazis. When Rome fell on June 4, 1944, Italian POWs and Italian Americans celebrated together across the United States. At Camp Hereford, a victory mass drew thousands, uniting former enemies and local citizens. The kindness extended to moments of grief. When prisoners received news of loved ones lost to bombing in Italy, American guards and officers joined their memorial services. Local families adopted men who had no one left, ensuring they would not face holidays alone. Medical care, too, left a deep impression. Italian doctors worked side by side with Americans, learning modern techniques. Prisoners received operations and treatments that in Italy would have been available only to the wealthy. The contrast with German prisoners grew sharper after Italy's surrender. While many Germans clung to Nazi ideology, Italians embraced their new role as co-belligerents, eager to work for Allied victory. In March 1944, 1,800 Italian service unit members were sent to Boston. At first, the city's Italian-American community kept its distance. They feared that association with prisoners might damage their reputation as loyal Americans. But the skepticism faded quickly. At the Boston port of embarkation, Italians proved themselves tireless workers. They sang in church choirs, helped cook for festivals, and introduced authentic Italian cuisine to second-generation families who had never tasted true Italian food. Still, tensions lingered. Within months, 1,300 prisoners were moved to Peddocks Island in Boston Harbor. There, life was freer. Trusted men were allowed Sunday boat trips into Boston's North End, where they shared meals with Italian-American families and built friendships that endured long after the war. Everywhere they went, Italian prisoners witnessed American power on a scale beyond imagination. Vast factories, endless fields, ships built in days, not years. It was a vision of industrial and agricultural strength that defied everything fascist propaganda had taught them to believe. In California's Central Valley, Italian prisoners saw farms larger than entire provinces back home. Massive harvesters completed in hours what would take weeks in Italy. They watched in disbelief as perfect fruit was discarded for minor blemishes, or entire crops plowed under simply to control prices. Waste that could have ended starvation in Italy was here just a byproduct of unlimited abundance. What stunned them most was the casual attitude toward plenty. Workers threw away half-eaten lunches, lights burned in empty rooms, automobiles filled parking lots. In wartime Italy, families survived on rations so meager that such scenes were unimaginable. Prisoners worked in the fields or on fishing boats, earning $8 a month. Even this small wage felt generous. Many carefully saved their pay, hoping to send money home once the war was over. The Italians also left permanent marks on American life. They introduced bocce ball to communities that still play today. They taught authentic pasta and pizza making, planting the roots of what would become a multi-billion-dollar industry. Their craftsmanship endured as well. Fountains, murals, and chapels still stand in dozens of towns. Camp newspapers reflected the change in spirit. What began as simple news about Italy soon grew into thoughtful discussions of democracy, farming, and reconstruction. Their words, shared across camps, spread new ideas about freedom and governance. On July 16, 1944, Italian service units arrived at Rock Island Arsenal. Their maintenance and support work proved so valuable that American commanders asked for repatriations, to be delayed, even after the war ended. In agriculture, they applied generations of expertise, introducing techniques that improved American harvests. In canneries, shipyards, and depots, their labor freed thousands of Americans for combat. The scale of their contribution was immense. At its peak in May 1945, America held 425,971 prisoners of war, including over 50,000 Italians. Italian service units alone contributed 90 million man-days of labor, saving the U.S. government $230 million and keeping critical harvests from rotting in the fields. More than 45,000 volunteered for service units. Fewer than 1% ever attempted escape. Many maintained friendships with American families, writing letters that lasted long after the war. Repatriation began in late 1945, but slowly. America still needed their labor as it shifted to peacetime production. Many Italians didn't want to leave. They had found kindness, friendship, and opportunity in America, while their homeland remained in ruins. When the departures finally began, local communities turned out in crowds. Newspapers wrote not about losing prisoners, but about saying farewell to friends. Between December 1945 and July 1946, the Italians returned home, carrying with them knowledge of democracy, agriculture, and industry. These men became unexpected architects of Italy's post-war recovery, applying lessons learned during captivity. And as promised, many came back to America, this time as immigrants. Sponsored by families, employers, or American women they had married, thousands began new lives. They founded businesses, especially in food and trade, strengthening bonds between Italy and the United States. For the men who once arrived as defeated prisoners, America had become more than a captor. It had become a teacher, a partner, and, for many, a new home. Former prisoners of war, and their descendants, went on to achieve prominence in American society. They became judges, business leaders, military officers, and community figures. Their children, raised with both Italian and American heritage, carried forward a bridge between cultures. Across the United States, reminders of their presence still remain. At Camp Hereford, a small chapel built in 1945 to honor 5 men who died there still stands, its concrete carved to resemble marble. In California and Massachusetts, bocce courts trace their origins to games introduced by Italian prisoners. Italian festivals in unlikely places like Texas and Utah continue to celebrate their legacy. Even family recipes, pasta sauces, breads, and pizzas once taught by POW cooks are passed down to this day. But the truest monuments are not buildings or games. They are the families and communities transformed by these encounters. Friendships formed in captivity grew into business partnerships that lasted generations. Sister city programs linking American and Italian towns began from these wartime connections. Historians now recognize the Italian POW experience as one of the most remarkable stories of enemies turned into allies. This transformation did not come from propaganda, but from experience. Italy's surrender in 1943 changed their status from enemy to co-belligerent. Italian-American communities provided cultural bridges. A shared Catholic faith created spiritual bonds. Most of all, American abundance and kindness destroyed fascist lies. The contrast with German prisoners is telling. Despite receiving similar treatment, many Germans clung to Nazi ideology. Italians, by contrast, almost universally embraced American values. They had lived the poverty Mussolini's regime could not fix, and in America they saw prosperity that could not be denied. The impact reached both nations. For America, it was proof that kindness and prosperity could win hearts and minds more effectively than force. For Italy, returning prisoners brought knowledge of democracy, modern farming, and industrial techniques that shaped post-war recovery. They carried home memories of a society where freedom, not conquest, created wealth, where diversity was strength, and where ordinary workers lived better than Italian aristocrats. Beginning in the 1970s, former prisoners organized reunions in the United States. These gatherings were not about captivity, but about friendship. At Camp Hereford in 1988, hundreds of former POWs returned, joined by thousands of Americans who had known them. Old men, once Mussolini's soldiers, embraced the American Guards, who had become their lifelong friends. Their grandchildren, Italian and American, played together, living proof of reconciliation. Why did so many Italians describe American camps as almost paradise? Not because captivity was easy, but because it revealed possibilities they had never imagined. They discovered that prosperity came from freedom, not conquest. That democracy worked better than dictatorship. That kindness could be stronger than fear. For men who had known only hunger, propaganda, and war, the American camps offered food, safety, and dignity. And in that simple humanity, enemies became allies, and in many cases, family. Compared to the ruins of bombed, occupied Italy, America represented hope and opportunity. The Italian prisoner of war experience left a lasting mark on American culture. Pizza, today a multi-billion-dollar industry, was popularized in part by Italian POW cooks who taught Americans authentic recipes. Decades before Starbucks, it was Italian prisoners who introduced espresso to communities that had never tasted strong coffee. Across small towns in America, Italian festivals still celebrate these connections. In Hereford, Texas, annual reunions became a beloved tradition. In California's Central Valley, wineries founded by former prisoners and their descendants still produce wine using techniques carried from Italy. Even language was touched. Thousands of Americans learned Italian in the camps, shaping business and cultural exchanges for years to come. Beyond the $230 million in wartime labor they provided, the long-term contributions were even greater. Former prisoners who returned as immigrants or maintained business ties built bridges of trade worth billions between the United States and Italy. Farming methods learned in America modernized Italian agriculture. Industrial techniques observed in American factories influenced Italian manufacturing, fueling the economic miracle of the 1950s and 60s. Psychologists later noted something remarkable. Unlike many POW populations scarred by trauma, Italian prisoners in America showed far lower rates of depression and PTSD. Why? Because they were treated better than they expected. They worked with purpose, found community, studied, worshipped, and after Italy's surrender, no longer saw themselves as enemies but as allies. Many spoke of their captivity not with bitterness but with gratitude. Their children and grandchildren remember this too. They grew up hearing not about pain, but about friendship, an unusual legacy of war. This story shows that even in the darkest chapters of history, transformation is possible. Men who arrived as Mussolini's soldiers left as advocates for democracy. Enemies became friends, prisoners became partners, many ultimately became Americans. Through simple acts, sharing food, providing medical care, allowing worship, and encouraging education, America achieved what propaganda never could. These men saw a society built on freedom, prosperity, and dignity, and they wanted that future for their own country. The legacy goes beyond labor. It lives in culture, cuisine, festivals, friendships, and families. Descendants on both sides of the Atlantic carry forward the bonds created in those years. The Italians called their captivity quasi paradiso, almost paradise. Not because it was perfect, but because it revealed what perfection could look like. They had known only war, hunger, and propaganda. In America, they discovered dignity, opportunity, and hope. The camps are mostly gone now, returned to farmland covered by suburbs, but reminders remain. A small chapel in Hereford, Texas, bocce courts across the nation, Italian recipes passed down in American kitchens, and families whose roots trace back to a soldier who stayed. They came as warriors of a fallen empire. They left as builders of a democratic future. They arrived as prisoners. They discovered paradise. And in that discovery, two nations found a friendship that war could not destroy, and time cannot erase.